issues now that it gets so dark so early. And so today I wanted to talk about calling in versus calling out. And it's funny, Googling cancel culture, this is something that gets blogged about so much. In fact, there was just something that came out, was it today? December 3rd, the long and tortured history of cancel culture that goes way back in history and describes all the different types of ways that people have been called out over time, even like the Scarlet Letter, if any of you have read that one, and lots of historical ways to sort of shame and shun people throughout time. So I'm going to drop a link to that one in the, yeah, here we go. I'll put that in the comments. I'll add some other links too. There's lots. There's so much that I'm like, okay, I don't have to really summarize all these amazing pieces, but they're all there to look at. But basically, I wanted to talk about calling in versus calling out as it relates to my work, which is in child trauma and attachment and mental health. And again, the goal of these mental health check-ins is to reduce the stigma about talking about mental health, healthy habits, healthy communication, things that we can do better, especially because, mental illness has a stigma. And getting help for mental illness has a stigma, but also other things that have a stigma are even like family life or things that are held in secrecy. So things that relate to parenting, romantic relationships, domestic issues tend to be things that we shy away from wanting to talk about openly and publicly. And this is because abuse happens in domestic environments, in homes, in families. And I've been working in this field of child abuse prevention now for a year and a half. And the numbers say that child abuse happens most often by a family member, someone that the child knows. So, I've kind of been checking in with myself about these check-ins. And I think that the reason I often promote positive communication so often, as well as just speaking openly about issues, is that shame really thrives in the secrecy of the home. So that's why I'm going to talk about, the interpersonal communication strategy that is calling someone in as opposed to calling them out. So first of all, calling out is, and thank you so much, Shelly, for watching and hitting the like button. That really helps me continue to make these to know who's watching. So if you're watching live or you're watching the recording and you want to hit like or love, or you want to share this video, please, that's really great. And thank you in advance. So calling out, I just want to say, it's interesting because reading some of these articles today, it's like calling out can be used for good or bad. And that's kind of the interesting thing, is that it's not as much right about the thing itself, but about how it's used. So in the example of shaming Hester Prynne for being an adulterer and wearing the Scarlet Letter A, right? So that's a way of calling out or canceling someone in a way that's very publicly shameful, and at the time served a purpose, which was to maintain social order. So probably at the time seen as something being a positive habit, and seen as something that was helping to maintain a society that they wanted. Unfortunately, that history includes race and class. So it can serve as a form of oppression to keep marginalized or oppressed groups down. So it's kind of important to see some of the wider context of calling out and publicly shaming. However, in recent, I've seen call out culture and cancel to do the opposite, to bring marginalized or oppressed groups, give us more power. So, for example, a few years ago when we had the Me Too movement, and how we could cancel someone like Harvey Weinstein and say, you know what, this behavior has been a secret, a really well-known but well-kept secret among everyone in Hollywood and people who knew him, but we were too ashamed to talk about it before. And now we're using the power of our voices to cancel this behavior and to say, this is really not allowed, very forcefully. So obviously there are instances in which very forcefully canceling is important. And obviously there's a difference between someone's behavior and who they are as a person. So I tend to shy away from really labeling whole people as toxic, or needing to be canceled, and rather asking for their behaviors to be changed. But I kind of always go back and forth as to whether, it does seem like for some people there just isn't any hope. Like, once someone is a sociopath, I don't think there's a cure for that. You either care about how people are feeling or you don't. And so I think that cancel culture can be really helpful for calling out some of these sociopathic tendencies, and hopefully, I think, calling out as well so policies and the things that create a sociopathic society. And of course, they're interrelated. And I want to talk about too that because families have a lot of secrecy and shame and a lot of encouragement to stay silent, to not talk about this, don't talk about this abuse that's happening, don't talk about this substance misuse in the home. I've mentioned on here before, families might try to gaslight their children, such as saying, oh, your dad's not drunk, he's just really tired. So there's a lot of that going on in households, to where calling out the actual truth and behavior that you see can be a really positive thing. So being able to call out and label that abuse can be really great for victims. So that is all just to say that calling out, there's a reason why it's been so important, and why it's been important for victims to have a voice. But I want to talk about lesser evils today, and how we might want to start to think about calling in versus calling out, to increase positive communication with people that we care about or want to have stronger relationships with, and how that can lead to a culture with a more nurturing and loving culture, where we can resolve conflicts and grow as people and a society through love and compassion and patience and understanding. So again, it's really not appropriate in the cases of actual abuse. Then just call it out. That's never okay. But in situations where there's disagreements, conflicts, even severe disagreements, like moral opinions that are different, or I think especially like in families or with partners where there's boundary violations, some of the things that I think that we see the most are put downs, negativity, being mean, as well as emotionally taking advantage of people and not understanding. I did a few weeks ago about emotional labor. When I think that if people understood that emotional labor is labor, that we could all be better about making sure that we know what holding emotional space is, and when someone needs us to hold emotional space for them, and as well as making sure that we ask permission before we're dumping things emotionally on others. So I think that that's a great first step, is just understanding that when we vent, we're asking our listener to do a lot for us emotionally. And that also when people need to vent, they often just really, really, really need us to listen and hold space without giving advice or judging or trying to fix it. So I kind of want to talk about, let's start with what even is calling in instead of calling out. So this is interesting because I have, quite a few friends with children, and there's been a huge shift these days. And there's, instead of it being called a time out, it's called a time in. And so how many of you had timeouts when you were little? I definitely had a few, maybe not a whole ton, maybe just a few timeouts where it was sort of like, you're being bad and you need to go over there and you are banished from the family until you think about what you did. And then you can come back and apologize. Did anyone have that version of a timeout? Seemed like pretty common. I was born in 84, so spent a lot of my childhood in the 80s and early 90s. And this seemed pretty common. Timeouts were pretty even like our school, we still have a version of a timeout. Like if you're bad, you need to go sit in solitude, in quiet, in the corner of the room, or in detention. Or I can remember having to change my card from green to yellow. You need to get up in front of the whole classroom and do the walk of shame and go over there and turn your card. And then if you get to red, then you're really in trouble, and your punishment is to be outcast from society. So we can see that in homes there's timeouts, and in schools there's timeouts, and that we tend to want to push people away when we feel that they are behaving badly or being bad. Or oftentimes in our the way that we raise children is to label them. Instead of their behavior is bad, we often will label, you are bad, which is really bad for kids who grow up into adults. And that's the way I was raised. And I would be really curious to hear some of the messaging that you may have internalized. So I wanted to talk about attachment. So I'm sure you've heard me talk about attachment before. And so attachment theory was something created by John Bowlby in the 50s and 60s after observing kids' interactions with their mothers. And securely attached children, meaning children who felt secure about their caregiver, their mom or their dad, that their parent loved them and paid attention to them and wanted them there, and these types of positive interactions between the caregiver and the child, is that the child would act in a secure way when the mother left the room. So the child might cry for a little bit, which was kind of normal because they wanted the mom came back, they would be excited to see the mom or the dad again. I think these studies were probably done with mothers. And that insecurely attached children would do a different thing. So these are the ones that had a lot of trauma at home, either abusive or neglectful parents, and they would either cry much, much, much more than was appropriate, start to act really, really anxious, maybe cry when the mom came back, or just pretend like they didn't feel anything at all, shut off all emotions, and they wouldn't care when the mom would leave or come back. So there were all sorts of different, and there's an author who wrote a book about nurturance culture named Nora Samaran, and I've been following her work and writing, and she talks about how she thinks avoidant attachment style is much more prevalent. I don't know whether that was based on data, but I've seen her write that in a group that she leads. And so it does kind of, and avoidant is really the attachment style where instead of addressing, in adulthood, the way it manifests in adulthood is that instead of addressing the conflict at hand, we stonewall, we go numb, we pretend it's not there, we kind of go away, we dissociate, and we try to avoid people interactions as much as possible when we start to feel uncomfortable. So this is due to, insecure attachment style as children, and we grow up and we learn that it's easier to just not address the thing at hand. It's easier to push people away. And definitely avoidant attachment style is one that I relate to a lot. And I think that a lot of people in our culture do relate to that one. Additionally, a few months ago, I had read the characteristics of white supremacy culture, and one of them is conflict avoidance. And conflict avoidance is super important in white supremacy culture, because if people aren't bringing up conflicts to solve or how to get better, how to improve things, and if people are taught that conflict is something to be avoided and it's shameful, then the people in power can maintain their power and stay in power. So it's really important to question why it is that we've been taught to avoid conflict and avoid talking to each other, and all the different levels. So from the home and from childhood, where we maybe our parents weren't around a whole lot, because we don't tend to have a supportive culture for parents. And so then we learned to just sort of numb out, because our caregivers weren't around as much as we needed them, and started to have some avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment can also be caused by a parent being emotionally enmeshed. So using the child to meet their own emotional needs. And then all of a sudden we feel like we really need to push people away, because if they come in too close, then they're going to overwhelm us and we're going to lose our sense of self and identity. That's another way that people will have avoidant attachment, as well as the larger social context of that over time we have been sort of brainwashed and indoctrinated to internalize that conflict is bad. So then what happens when there's something that needs our attention, that's a conflict that needs to be changed and addressed, and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up, and we've been ignoring it and ignoring it and ignoring it, and then all of a sudden it explodes and we just need to cancel, we need to be angry. This is something that I definitely have done throughout my career and in my relationships, is to avoid the thing that needs to be said. And once I do need to say it, it comes out with anger. And that anger is because my needs are not getting met, and I was never taught positive ways to help, to ask for what I need, or to say, hey, how can we work together to fix this and make it better? Luckily, I had a really excellent boss in New York City who I loved it. He would always say we can always find a great solution for every challenge. And he would just always say that. And I would say, this thing is coming up. And he'd be like, great, let's go sit in a meeting room. Let's work it out. Let's figure out what the best possible solution was. And he was a very innovations oriented person. And that was new to me. And he was not American, by the way. So that's an interesting thing. He was Norwegian. And so I don't know if he maybe just doesn't have this thing as much about trying to avoid conflict as much as possible. I don't know how distinctly American that is. It could be pretty American, due to our roots in enslaving other human beings and trying to avoid all conflict in order to keep people down as much as possible here. So that was really good at helping me rewire conflict. Oh, cool, I'm challenged. Let's address it head on and come up with some creative solutions even better than before. And every single time that he would say that to me, it would help rewire my brain. And so when it comes to trying to bring up things that we see as at odds with how we believe, even significant things, like how could you think that way? How could you be that way? I think that calling people in, meaning engaging with people in a way that's gentle, nurturing, and in a way that sees people where they're at and tries to maybe gently communicate how we're seeing it differently, and is a way that honors and respects the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And so, I didn't come back around to time ins versus time outs. So I talked a lot about time outs, right? But time in is wow, for parents, I'm seeing that you're acting out, and I want to bring you into me. Let's connect more. Obviously, you're needing connection right now. How can we talk about this and connect about this and solve this problem and make it better? And I posted this little meme quote a couple days ago that I think was written for parents, but to me could also be for couples or adults of any kind. And it says, beneath every behavior, there is a feeling, and beneath each feeling is a need. And when we meet that need, rather than focus on the behavior, we begin to deal with the cause, not the symptom. And that's attributed to Ashley Warner. And so this is the kind of thing about calling in versus calling out, is realizing that all humans have needs, and especially when it comes to opinions and trying to challenge people's opinions, that people have this need to have an identity and to have a voice and to feel heard and seen. And that if we can acknowledge those basic human needs first before challenging someone's, or rather than challenging, engaging with people to really see like, why do they have this opinion, or why are they violating this boundary, or why are they doing this thing that doesn't seem at all appropriate to me, and how can I see it from their perspective as to why they might be doing this, so meaningful conversation and actual ground could be made. Because the thing about cancel culture and culture that you've probably noticed is that it doesn't actually necessarily work. And again, we're not talking about situations of abuse. That's not, I explain that. We're not talking about that. Call that shit out. But even if it's something that you see as being pretty severe, like, for example, like trans rights are pretty big, and there's a lot of heated things that I see on the internet about that. Or maybe you have a racist relative that's posting something, is that even if you are sure that you're right, you're sure that your heart is in the best place and it's the biggest, and that you're wrong, which they definitely are. It just doesn't work. And so shame is a really awful place to start to change a need to feel that they have dignity and worth. And so the more that we can call people in, bring people in towards us and say, hey, I noticed that you posted this thing. Can you, I was a little bit surprised by that, just because it seems to be pushing some of us away. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about why you posted that, and really help people feel heard. And then once you have someone's attention and they feel safe with you, it then might be the opportunity to say, well, what do you think about the way I see it though? Or, hey, I used to kind of think like that too. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But then I read this great thing and it kind of changed my mind a little bit. And then they could be in a safe place to engage and to maybe change their mind. There was a study done in 2016, or was published in 2016 at Yale, and I believe it was the psychology department. And they had people answer questions about different political issues. And just by helping the participants imagine that they felt safer, and doing that before they filled out the participants shifted to be a little bit more progressive, a little bit more liberal. Because what is progressive, right? Progressive is being open to new ideas and change, and conservatism is wanting things to stay the same. And so when you think about it intuitively, it really makes a lot of sense that when people feel safer, they are more open to change. They're more open to change, and you can be more comfortable, because change is uncomfortable. So if we're attacking people, we're calling them out, we're canceling them, we're shaming them, we're telling them how awful they are, this is a really tough place, because it's a place of feeling not for people to come around. Change neurologically impossible, because if you feel under attack, then different parts of your brain are engaged than when you feel safe. So if your reptile brain is flared up and someone is telling you how awful you are, you're just going to argue to the death your point of view, and you're not going to be open. And I really think of the different mentors that I've had throughout my life, different teachers who have helped shift. And if you saw my mental health check-in about how I used to be politically more conservative or moderate, and I had some really gentle teachers really gently bring me to their side by, instead of shaming me, just saying, okay, but let's talk about a little bit more complexity on that issue. Maybe you're not seeing all the different complexities. And because I didn't feel shamed, then my brain felt safe, and I could actually absorb that new information and form an even better opinion than before. And so one thing is the Plato's allegory of the cave, where he talks about using the Socratic method to help people understand things differently. So rather than telling people the new information, and I highly recommend watching the School of Life version of the allegory of the cave. It's really helpful to understand ignorance, human ignorance that we all have, and how to help bring out of the cave and see the new information. But asking people questions so that they come to their own ideas and own conclusions is one great way. And also, this is great from How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a really great book by Dale Carnegie. Actually, when is that book from? Is it from like the 30s? Does anyone know? 1936. Wow, that's so cool. It's one of my favorites. I think it's the very first one, the very first chapter, where he talks about this exact thing that I'm talking about, which is that if someone, I think I'm getting this example right. If you're trying to convince someone that red cars are the best, but they like blue cars, and they say blue cars are the best, and you go, no, red cars are the best. Now they're going to fight with you, no, it's blue cars, and you're going to go, no, it's red cars, and you're never going to get them. But if you say, if they say, I love blue cars, and you say, I love blue cars too. And you say all the great things about blue cars, and then you go, but also let me tell you about red cars. Now you've made someone feel safe enough to hear all about the red cars that you think are better. So I think that this is really the basis of calling in versus calling out. And I know that there's really this appeal to wanting to demonize people and to want to attack them and to want to really pay for what I'm really wanting people to suffer. And I really want to challenge you to look at that mindset and question whether that comes from you wanting to dole out what it was that you received in childhood. And so I think that in my childhood, there were a lot of moments where it felt like I was punished unfairly. Oftentimes my parents, who were pretty young, stressed, would snap and have volatile emotional reactions. And in adulthood, before I addressed that trauma, I would also want to punish other people, and I would want to lash out, and I would want to get angry, and I would want to say, this is your fault and you need to pay, and you're stupid, and that somehow felt really good, to be self-righteous and to really just tell people off and tell them why they were wrong, because that's what I received. And I just want to challenge you. First of all, has it ever worked? And I guess if then we say, well, what do you mean by worked? Is that I'm challenging you to try and make the goal more connection, more kindness, more compassion, despite our differences. And having this focus on connecting with people as opposed to pushing people away, getting on our high horse, having that ego rush, making sure that people know how right we are. Definitely for a long time, my ego really wanted to prove how much I knew, which seemed to be my self-worth. And so, that we can kind of gently check in with ourselves and see where our ego is trying to gain some sense of self-worth, and to see whether or not we can be gentle and kind with ourselves and say, I'm noticing that you're trying to use being right all the time and being self-righteous and being angry as a way to affirm your self-worth. And I'm here to tell you that you're worthy no matter how much you know or how right you are. And it's also okay to be wrong. And it's also okay to not know all the things. And it isn't possible for everyone out there to know all the things that you know and to agree with every single thing that you think. And so, I think that the more times that we can be kind and gentle to ourselves and to affirm our own inherent worth to ourselves and to maybe see these different insecurities in different ways that we're trying to be validated, the less often we have to shame people or kind of make people pay. And we can actually call people in and have difficult conversations. And I guess in my head, I've been thinking a little, these examples a little bit about like different comments online. We're online a lot now. In fact, I had written this blog, How to Be a Kind Internet Person. Maybe I can do that. I'll do that one next time. Read those. I'll kind of wrap up here. But when it comes to having difficult conversations with like our family members, like I always talk about our inner circle. So our parents, our kids, our siblings, our partners, our close friends. We can definitely have the tendency to want to call people out instead of call people in those situations, as well as in online spaces or at work. And I think online is a particular problem because we're not seeing someone's face. Easy to dehumanize them and not realize it on the other side. But with our families too, I think there is a tendency to repeat patterns that we may have learned. Now, certainly not all of you learned these habits of you, or not all of you are afraid of having good, positive conflict. But a lot of us did learn, especially for those of us in the US, like we really, really learned, like, don't rock the boat, don't bring anything up. We don't want to solve it. Conflict is bad. And so I think that one thing that we can do to start calling people in instead of calling them out is to try to just remember that the goal is connection. And the goal is increasing that feeling of connection with others and increasing, meaning that we can be vulnerable, safe being vulnerable, and that we are helping provide a safe space for other people to be vulnerable as well. So, and to make that the goal instead of being right, being the goal. And that slowly over time, if we prioritize connection, that we will actually see the needle move in the way that we want. And in fact, when people trust us and they can see that we're fair and compassionate people, we can be more influential. So just like the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, if you really think that your way of thinking and seeing the world is the best way, as it would be if, say, you were an anti-racist and you on that, or other great social and things that you really want better, is that you are going to be more influential when you work on your issues of being humble, knowing your own self-worth from the inside, not shaming people, being kind and compassionate, seeing people where they are, starting with people where they are, is that people are going to start to know you and admire you for being, to having that gentleness and that, for not being as reactive. So, that's like a small introduction of calling in versus calling out. And I'll drop a couple more links. I mean, I love this piece. I'm interested in this originally was written last summer in the New York Times. It's called I'm a Black Feminist. I think call out culture is toxic. It's by Loretta Ross. And she wrote another one that was published actually just a few weeks ago in the New York Times called What If Instead of Calling People Out, We Called Them In, which I hadn't even seen when I decided on this topic, but I have been thinking a lot about it because I've been talking with my friend Anne about growing up in homes with neglect, physical and emotional neglect, and how if you grew up in a home with neglect, it's so much our tendency to want to push people away because we didn't often feel like the people who were supposed to bring us in and fight for us and really fight for that connection and love and to repair and hold each other close. It was just missing. And I really feel like in a lot of homes in the United States that this was missing. And so we can tend to be very dismissive about people instead of wanting to fight for the people who matter the most to us by calling them in and resolving our differences. So, okay, that's it for today, and I'll see you on Thursday. Thanks for watching.